Okay, well, first of all, thank you guys for coming, and our presentation today is Tactical Burp 2.0 with Kevin Johnson and Jason Gillum. There is a chat dialogue box over on the side for all of you guys to ask your questions, and they will get to them. And everyone have a good day.
So,
Yay!
yay! So, Cassie has to leave for something else, so she's not going to be here for the entire session. So instead of her signing in, I had her use my computer real quick, and then after we did it, I realized how awkward that was. So we probably should have just had her sign in.
I think it would have been better if she stood behind your sand trooper and just kind of waved it around a little bit.
Made it American. Yeah. That's it. She said she needed a step stool. She feels short at my standing desk, which I've never thought of Cassie as short, but yeah, I guess she is shorter than I am. And just never crossed my mind. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm unlocking my phone so I can see the Slack window. So this is, like Cassie said, Tactical Burp 2.0. Jason and I are going to run it. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a small slide deck that I'm presenting. And then once we get past the slide deck, we're going to swap presenters. And, of course, we will do that completely gracefully. And Jason will take over sharing his screen. And what he'll be showing, we'll have SamuraiWTF running. For the people who don't know what SamuraiWTF is, we'll talk about it. And we'll go with that. We're going to start talking about Tactical Burp. That makes sense? So the first thing to talk about is just to do a quick introduction of each of us. I'm Kevin. I'm the founder of and CEO of Secure Ideas. I am a nerd. I've been a nerd for a very long time. I don't know another way to put it. And yes, the Sand Trooper is my costume. I've thought about putting Chewie here, but Chewbacca sheds, and so I'm a little concerned about doing that.
Oh, it just looks kind of like me, but with a bunch of stuff in front of it.
Yeah.
So, my name is Jason Gillum. I'm also with Secure Ideas, CIO. Don't let that put you off. I'm actually also a nerd. I hate the C letter in front of things. It's yeah, you're not technical anymore, But
do you want us to be the TIO, the technical information?
Technical. Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah, that'll work.
TIO. So. I've been for over 20 years, well, actually much longer than that. I've been programming things, but also, security, pen testing, that sort of stuff. I do a lot of that sort of stuff. Also do a lot of open source tools. One of the relevant things, I guess, to this conversation is I write plugins or extensions, I guess they're called, for Burp Suite. So CO2 is one of the earlier ones that I wrote, and then I've also more recently been working on Paramalyzer over the past couple of years, and I actually have a new release of that one coming out soon. So making some improvements on there. So get my little plug in there. I don't sell it or anything, so it's not like I can make any money off of it, but and I won't put any ads on it either. So
yeah, good.
It's ad free. Ad free.
That's not a joke about somebody on Twitter. Honestly.
No, absolutely not. All right.
Cool. So just a quick spiel about us. We're Secure Ideas. We believe in and do lots of different consulting. Most people know us for penetration testing, application security testing, and we do a lot of training. We just want to do a quick pitch. One, if you are a veteran, active duty military, or first responder, a lot of our training is free. Reach out. The training that isn't free, we have discounts for. Please just reach out for that. The second pitch, if you work with or know of a charitable nonprofit, we offer free services to charitable nonprofits. Please note, though, that the charitable nonprofit idea is not that the government thinks you're a charitable nonprofit. It's that we approve of your charity nonprofitness. And what I mean by that is pretty simple. We don't want to give services to jerk charities. Westboro Baptist Church, the people that protest funerals and do other horrific, abhorrent things, they are a federally recognized charitable nonprofit, but Secure Ideas will not be giving them free services. So somebody referred to it as "Don't Be a Dick" charity, and I like that. So just reach out to us. We've got the information on that. What have you. I'm excited about this, so I'm going to throw it out there. Yesterday, we published our Knowledge Center. We're trying to create a public repository of business information, not like how do you pen test a SQL injection flaw. That we've been trying to produce and release and everything like this. But this is something like, how much does a pen test cost? What is a pen test? How do you scope it? Things like that. So we're trying to just be as open and transparent with things as possible. So we published that last night. I guess we published it yesterday afternoon and then announced it on Twitter and Facebook last night. It was why I made the joke about obsessing over the Google Analytics. It's because we published it last night, and I was like, oh man, we got 5 people on the site. They're looking at the pages. So, Jason, you want to explain this one?
Sure. Professionally Evil. Oh, we need to update this slide. Sorry, I have this thing where Professionally Evil is actually a registered trademark, not a service mark.
Dang it, I missed that.
So the little SM, as silly as it sounds, that little SM on there bothers me. It's supposed to be the R with the circle on it, right?
Yes.
So Professionally Evil. So that's our tagline, and I've heard stories of the origin of it, but I guess the important thing is really what it means to us, which is we need to think from the perspective of an attacker. So it's that kind of work through in your mind what your malicious actor is doing and understand what it is, so that you can understand first of all how to reproduce what they're doing, but also how to fix it and how to plug the gaps, sort of thing. The professionally part of the Professionally Evil is, of course, that's doing so under contract with an actual legal agreement in place. So we don't want to take the information that we learned, for example, in this webcast. You don't want to take that information and then just arbitrarily start using it on websites that you don't own or have permission to test. So be aware that is committing a crime if you start hacking something that's not yours and you don't have permission to test. So, and we're not going to save you from that. So don't do it.
Yeah, no, but I think this is a very important thing. Now I'm curious about the way you said you've heard origin stories, as if you've heard these horrific origin stories. Now I'm curious.
I'm not sure. Well, see, here's the thing. I don't recall if you coined the term or somebody in one of your classes coined the term and then it just kind of
so I
kept on, or because I don't know.
Yeah, so I said it, and I would say it quite often in class, and one of the students in class said, man, that would be an awesome slogan for a company. And I said, yes, it would be. And it became the slogan for the company.
And that's how it became the slogan of the company. Okay, so you had the saying all along, but it didn't become the slogan until a student said, hey.
Yeah, it had never crossed my mind that it was actually a fun little slogan. Like, it just really hadn't. Yet. So, cool. Okay, so the next thing, really quickly, just, why web pen testing? And this, I don't think we have to convince you all. You're here because you know that testing your applications is critical, right? We are exposing way too many systems to the internet, to attackers, and let's be clear, and I believe you guys have all heard me say this before. If not, I'll say it again. The attacker could be on your own network, right? So, like, we spend too much time with organizations that will say things like, oh, we don't have to test those applications. They're internal. None of our users would attack us. All of our users are gruntled. And no, not all of your users are gruntled, right? There are days I'm not gruntled, and I'm one of the owners of the company. And and that doesn't even take into account, right, an attacker who compromises a workstation or a user, and through that user's system has access to the internal networks, right? So it's critical that you test these things.
Yeah, remember the insider attacker is not necessarily physically inside your building, right? It could be somebody whose machine has been compromised, then they become the insider or the malicious agent by proxy. So.
And I think that it's critical to understand how to do this, even if you don't do the testing, right? If you're not the tester, if you don't understand what Jason and I would do if you hired us, or your own red team would do when you assign it to them, it's really difficult to understand how to fix things. It's also difficult to understand what level of effort things are, right? Like we find quite often, and the Knowledge Center will explain this. Aha, see, I pointed at it again. Is that testing an app really doesn't take as long as people think it should or does, right? We test apps pretty quickly. And I want to be very clear, as you'll hear as we talk about Burp itself, right? We don't do very much automation around that, right? I actually had an interesting conversation with another security consulting company last night. It's a good friend of mine. I'm not going to name them because I'm about to make fun of them. And they were having this conversation with me like, yeah, but don't you automate your test, right? No, we don't automate our test. Well, what about? No, we don't. Like, no, we don't do that, right? And we'll talk about spidering a website in a minute. But we'll talk about why spidering a website is not the right way to do it, and why spidering a website actually ends up taking more time for you than just doing what we're about to talk about with mapping and everything. Yeah.
Right. Now let's be clear. There is definitely a place for automation,
yes.
And that is something that needs to happen. But what we're talking about today, mostly, we're talking about, well, first of all, the product is Burp Suite,
right?
Portswigger's product. So as we get into that, we're going to see that it has both a lot of tools for manual pen testing, and then it also has some automation testing as well. So we're going to talk about both sides of that.
Yep.
But what Kevin's referring to is what we do. So when someone says, hey, can you do a penetration test on this application? That is a mostly manual process. It has to be, because we have to understand the application. Yep. That's the difference between an automated script that doesn't really understand an application versus a person who spends the time to actually understand what the application does.
Yep, exactly. So another thing you all need to be aware of, and again, this is one of those things, like, of course you know this, right? The OWASP Top 10. When we start looking at applications, one of the most common things people talk to us about is, do you test for the OWASP Top 10? Now, having said that, I want to be very clear. OWASP themselves tell you this is not a checklist to test against, right? This is just, hey, the top 10 things we've seen in the data sets that are given to us, right? Us being OWASP. And you'll hear Jason and I talk quite often about how wrong the 2017 list is. This is the list, right? And as you start dealing with stuff and as you start trying to learn stuff, it is critical that you learn what the top 10 is. Mainly because as you start looking at compliance, and I'm not going to get into governance and all that crud right now, but auditors and those type of people, this is the bar they use to determine if you understand application security, right? If you understand the top 10 and what have you. Personally, we've got the 2017 list here. I prefer to know both the 2017 and the 2013 list, mainly because, well, one, they're both still relevant, but two, a lot of compliance things have not updated. I've talked to QSAs that are still testing against the 2013 list. I've talked to other auditors and teams that are still working off of the 2013 list. So, Yep. Which brings us to context. And to me, and Jason can disagree if he wants, but I don't think he will. One of the most important things to understand in everything you do for pen testing, application security, working within Burp, is what context is the thing you're looking at within, right? If you don't understand the context, it's very, very difficult to understand where vulnerabilities exist, where the exploits can go, what risk this application or these problems expose the organization to, right? So you have to understand that context. And then on top of that, when you start to work within the UI, the user interface of Burp, if you don't understand the context of what you're doing, it's very difficult to understand where in the tool set you should be. Okay.
Hey, there's actually a good example of this that Mike ran into earlier this week. He was looking at results from a Nessus scan. Did you see that one? It was a web,
the one where
it was web results.
The false positive, right?
It was basically as a false positive. So this is a case, automated scanner looks at it and says, oh yeah, this is definitely a problem. And Mike looks at it and goes, well, actually, that's only a problem if you're using a legacy browser.
And by legacy, he means something like from 37,000 years ago.
It was, yeah, like it had to be, I can't remember. It was like Windows NT era. Like it was like way back. And that, since then, like all modern browsers, this particular it was a cross-site scripting flaw, I think.
It required content sniffing to be enabled on the browser.
That's what it was, yeah. It was content sniffing, yeah.
Yeah, and the automated tool actually said that. Like, this is a problem for content sniffing browsers, and like Mike said to us, and Jason just repeated, content sniffing has not been an option in browsers. All exaggeration aside, I want to say it was at least 10 years.
15.
Like I don't remember the date he said, but it doesn't matter for right now. But it absolutely was
like 2003 or 2004. I thought it's like
even longer, right? Like it's one of those things where if you don't understand the context of what the vulnerability is, then you panic, right? And the automated tools, I want to say the automated tool even marked it as like a high risk finding.
Yeah.
Like this is critical. You've got to deal with this right now. And it's like actually. No, you don't. And while I'm not advocating, and I don't think Jason is either, of don't fix vulnerabilities, we are advocating to focus your time and effort where it needs to be focused, right? Like, I don't think anybody has unlimited budget, unlimited time, and unlimited resources. And if you have that first one, please contact us for an SOW. But but all seriousness, we don't, right? Nobody has unlimited resources and budget and time. So we have to be able to point our developers, point our systems, our businesses, whatever, to the parts that make the most sense. So application context is very simple, right? What does the application do? Where is it? Where does it live? Why is it important to the organization, right? If you don't understand what the application does, then, and to be blunt, it's very, very difficult for you to understand where to focus your time to find vulnerabilities and exploitation options, right? So you have to understand the application's context. You have to understand what it is, right? Because I'll tell you right now, a public calendar app tends to be less important contextually than an online banking app, right? Now, vulnerabilities and capabilities for exploitation may change that importance, but as an application by itself, it tends to be easy to say that's less important, right? Mm-hmm. The vulnerability context is the context of vulnerability runs it. Like, for example, if you're looking at an application that is pulling data out of some data store, right, you're going to look for something like SQL injection, LDAP injection, whatever. If you've got an application that it's mostly static content, right, then SQL injection is probably not something you're going to look for. You're going to look for something like, hey, do we have cross-site scripting capabilities? Are we using anything from the client request in the response? Mm-hmm. Or, right, we're going to look for misconfigurations or content that's available without realizing it. if we're looking at, I'm sorry?
I was going to say another good example there for vulnerability context is cross-site request forgery.
Yep.
Right, CSRF flaws. So most search boxes, search fields on any given application are vulnerable to cross-site request forgery, except that because we're not talking about sensitive data or accessing sensitive functionality in this case,
yep,
it doesn't really matter.
So, yeah. I mean, Google, my understanding is Google regularly responds to there is a cross-site request forgery in your search capabilities in their bug bounty program. I don't know that for a fact, but that's my understanding, is because people constantly report, hey, this search can be cross-site request forgeried. I don't know if I made it a verb. So, but to them, that's not a sensitive transaction. And yes, we've all heard the idea, well, I could get your browser history to say that you searched for how to kill my spouse, and then I could kill your spouse and get away with it. Yeah, this is not Matlock. So, right, that becomes important. Finally, the exploit context, right? As you look at running an exploit, what is the context? Where's that exploit going to run? Like, for example, and the example I always think is good is cross-site scripting. If you have cross-site scripting in an application and the payload lands in plain text on the web page, the context there is, hey, let's try a script tag and let's try things like that. If your payload lands inside of the form field of an HTML document for submitting a form, well, then just dumping a script tag isn't going to work, right? So you have to understand the context of where your payload runs to then determine what that payload should be. And so that context is critical. And
so,
yes.
I was going to say, so the translation for that, or I guess the skill set that you need to cultivate if you're getting into web app pen testing, you're going to have to be able to open up the dev console and start looking at the page, the HTML, the JavaScript that's in there, and start trying to understand what's going on inside the application.
Yep.
Especially with modern apps, because there's so much of the logic that's actually right in front of you running inside the browser that you can't just ignore it.
Yep. Yeah. So that's important. And then finally, the web app testing affinity, right? What we mean by this is what are things that can work well under automation or under manual testing. And again, this is not for like what we do, because we do very little automation in our pen tests. And mainly that's because if you're going to pay $250 an hour for a consultant, you don't want them to just click start on an automated tool. And while maybe from a greedy capitalist perspective that would be better for us, it's not how we want to run our business either. But I will say that there are some automations we do, like as we'll show you with Intruder, we will fuzz things automatically, right? Now we still analyze manually, but when you talk about automation, things like traditional cross-site scripting or various injection flaws tend to be easier for an automated tool to find them, right? You're going to get better results. And what we mean by better results is fewer false positives and fewer false negatives, right? And I think we all should know the difference there, right? A false positive is the tool says you're vulnerable to this, but you're not really. A false negative is the tool doesn't tell you you're vulnerable, but you are, right? I will tell you right now that I can probably guarantee that in every single pen test Secure Ideas has ever done, we have false negatives. And what I mean by that is we don't guarantee that we can find every single flaw. We can't guarantee that, right? And I am sure that we have missed stuff. I'm not happy with that. I'd like to be able to say, yep, we find everything. But the reality is, even with our manual process, we're going to miss things, okay? On the manual side, it's much easier to find problems with authentication and authorization, DOM-based problems. As a matter of fact, a lot of the automated tools attempt to find DOM-based stuff. I can't think of a single time in years that I've seen a DOM-based flaw found by an automated tool that was really a DOM-based flaw. Like, they don't really understand the the object model and how client-side code works. They can't process it right or something.
Yeah.
But
even Burp Suites struggled with that somewhat, with the DOM base, in that it actually does a decent job, I find, and we'll get into this a little bit once we look at the tool, but it does a decent job of finding places where DOM-based cross-site scripting may be, but a lot of the time it's a false positive.
Yeah. Yep. So, okay, let's switch. Okay, Jason, I'm gonna turn off showing my screen.
Okay.
And then I'm assuming you can turn on showing your screen. I believe it just turned off.
Yeah, just give me a second here. I need to. Well, I need to make first. First, I need to make myself the presenter. So hang on, let me do that first.
Oh, I thought you were. I'm sorry.
Well, no, you were just presenting. Make presenter. Okay, there we go. All right, so, and I want to show Samurai. Okay. Let me know if you see Samurai.
I do.
Okay. Is the size okay for this?
I can see it fine, but I know what I'm looking at, so I'm going to let everybody else answer that.
All right. Looks okay? Okay. All right. I played around with the scale right before we came on. I'm hoping that I tried to get it large enough so that we can see what's going on, but still small enough so that I can fit everything on the screen. So
yeah, so we always run into that problem, right?
Yeah, it's really hard with this. So so this environment here that we're looking at, this is it's a virtual machine, and it's, let me just shrink it down so you can kind of see the cool desktop on here. It's the Samurai web testing framework 2.0. No, sorry, 4.2 is what we're at now.
I was going to say 2.0.
No, it's Burp 2. It's Burp 2. I know.
Now, before we get into Burp, real quick, SamuraiWTF is an open source tool. It's over 10 years old. Heck, we're now at 11, aren't we?
We are, but I still have a few challenge coins.
I still have some challenge coins.
Anniversary. So.
If anybody didn't get a 10th anniversary challenge coin, send us an email and we may be able to send you one, or see us somewhere. But it's an open source testing and training tool. It's built with Vagrant, and it has vulnerable apps in it as well as tool sets. Now, you've loaded the professional version of Burp, correct?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so if you download Samurai, we've got a zip file available to you. Sorry, not an ISO. We have a zip file available with a pre-made VirtualBox image, and you can use Vagrant to build it yourself. If you do either of those, you will not get the professional version of Burp. Sorry, that's just the way it works. If you want the professional version of Burp, you have to pay for it. That has nothing to do with us, but we all think, I personally think that if you're doing pen testing, even playing with pen testing, you should buy a copy of Burp. I like it.
Yeah. And it's relatively inexpensive for a software license for something if you're using it on a regular basis as well.
Yeah.
So it's good. So inside of Samurai, just right quick, if you go under applications, there's the SamuraiWTF menu. For those of you who are thinking, well, I've played around with other distributions like Kali, and it has hundreds of tools. Why do you only have a few? And that is because our focus on this, it's not primarily meant to be a replacement for a pen testing box. So it doesn't replace Kali.
Right.
What it does is it provides a training environment. So we have, if we open up a browser here, we have several targets set up, and we use those when we teach classes on web app pen testing and application security. So that's where we get that. Our plan is to keep adding more targets, make more and more available. A lot of them are running inside of containers inside of SamuraiWTF. So it's meant to be like a safe place to mess around where you don't have to worry about permission because you're only attacking inside the virtual machine. Right.
And the Samurai virtual machine has been approved by very large organizations for use. My understanding is the DoD has approved it within the processes or whatever for people to use it there. It is designed to be used in host-only mode. So we have attempted to do our best to not expose somebody using it to attack, even though it has vulnerable apps running in it. So I'm having network issues.
You just froze for a sec.
Dang it. I hate
somebody running Rumble.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, go.
All right. So, and I'm also on a Dell too, so hopefully mine won't freeze. So one of the first things we have to do, because we're using a proxy, is we will want to actually have our browser proxy our traffic through Burp Suite. So I've gone ahead and set up a localhost 8080, which is the default port for Burp Suite. And I have that running in, I use Foxy Proxy to set that up. So you just need some kind of proxy manipulation tool. You could set the system proxy as well, but we find it a lot easier just to use something like Foxy Proxy. You can either use Chrome or Firefox. I'm setting this up inside of Chrome.
Yeah. One of the problems with the system proxy, just as throwing it out there for you to think about, is if you set the system to proxy through Burp, everything on that system will go through Burp. Now, if that's what you meant to do, that's okay. But you would be amazed by how many of the things you run on your system that go through the internet.
Exactly. Okay, so this is the latest version of Burp Suite Pro, 2.1.03. When you first start it up, once you get past the installing a license part for Burp Suite Professional, if you're running the community version, of course you won't need to install a license, but if you're in Professional, you will. We're going to show the Professional because that way it shows the entire suite of tools, and I'll point out which ones are not available on the community version as we go through.
I will also say, just to be clear, we get no sponsorship or money back from Portswigger because we use Burp. We are demonstrating Burp because we believe it is the best option for pen testing.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I've gotten some emails from people that are like, "Oh, why don't you admit that you get money from?" We don't.
No, we don't. We pay for every license full price.
Yeah, we don't even. Yeah, you're right. We don't even get a discount on our licenses, man.
Nope, we don't. The only perk we get, which I think anybody can get, is if you are teaching a class, like not a short like a webcast, but if you're doing like a multi-day class, Portswigger is pretty open about through the instructor giving them a student license, so the students can actually experience the professional version.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
And so limited license when you do that. Like when we teach our class, the Professional Evil Application Security class, I want to say it's a 2-week license.
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah. It's long enough to get through the class and play with it a little bit, and then that's it.
So we have when you first go in, you're going to get option to open up a temporary or a new project on disk or open an existing project. From inside of Samurai, in this case here, I'm just going to go with a temporary project. But normally, if you're running an actual pen test, you will want to actually start a new project on disk. That sets up the folder persistent structure so that you don't lose your spot. If it crashes, it rarely does. Very, very rarely have I had Burp crash on me. But if it does, or if your entire machine crashes for some reason and you have to get back in and recover, it basically saves everything when you do that. It doesn't do that necessarily with a temporary project as far as I know. So, but I'm going to do a temporary one this time. Also, you have the option of saving previous configurations. I don't really do that. I don't know if you make use of that at all, Kevin, but I
always feel like I should, right? Like like, oh man, I should use that. And then every time I think about doing it, it's after I've already built my project and moved in.
So I would say if you're in a corporation and let's say you most of the applications you test use a particular like an NT authentication or something like that to get to. That would be something you would want to preset, save it off as a configuration, then you can just load it here. That way you don't have to go back through and reset that configuration every time.
Yeah. I also have talked to some development teams that will use that as part of their unit test type thing, where they'll have a config, but it's not what I do.
Yeah, well, I think it probably makes less sense for us because we're third-party testers. So when we go from one app to the next app to the next app, they're usually completely different platforms, completely different networks. Everything's completely different each time. So we would have 100 different configuration files if we try to save them off. So
yeah.
So anyway, let me get started in here so we can start talking about it. And one thing I wanted to, I thought I hit that button. Okay. I saw it press.
I swear I did.
So it's also, if you're running natively on your operating system, it tends to start up faster than it does inside of a virtual machine. So
you can help that by increasing the amount of RAM and the number of virtual CPUs that your VM has. I want to say we're set at 2 gig or 4 gig, I'm sorry, by default.
It might be 4, yeah.
Which is low. That's on the low end, right?
This is actually taking much longer than I was expecting. I'm wondering if something's broken. That's because I didn't actually make a sacrifice to the demo gods. I knew I forgot something.
That is the problem.
All right, let me cancel out and I'll try again. Because that seems much longer than it's supposed to be.
I will say, how much RAM is in your VM right now? You didn't think to look, did you?
It should be the default. It was 4.
Yeah, should be, but
yeah.
This is how it always works, guys. You start to do a live demo and everything blows up. But so while this is loading, keep in mind that for the people who don't know, the idea of Burp is it's an interception proxy. But as we'll talk about, we don't tend to intercept. We allow Burp to capture all of the traffic from our client to the server and back. And then we use what it captured in our testing. Right, and we follow a pretty simple 4-step methodology, right? We start with reconnaissance, where we're looking out on the internet for things that have leaked. We then move to mapping, and you'll see once we get Burp running that we will very quickly run through the functionality of the app as a normal user. So we will capture manually all of the different traffic back and forth. And the reason we want to capture that traffic is, one, we want to understand the transaction flow, right? How does the app work? When a user uses the app normally, like, hey, I come to the front page, I click login, I authenticate, I then go back to a dashboard, I go into my account, right? There's a flow that a normal user will use. And we're going to use Burp to capture that. And then as we go through it, we're going to look at, okay, in that flow, what happens? What gets sent up? What gets pulled back down? What goes on there? This does not appear to be good, Jason.
Oh no, I actually paused the video, so I'm trying to bring it up.
Okay, I'm like, it's sitting right.
Yeah, well, I was worried that the video feed plus trying to start up in a VM was overloading the actual laptop. So
okay, good. I feel better then because I was like,
So I'm seeing something a little different than what you're seeing, but it's still not getting past the loading screen, which is odd because it did it just before I started.
Well, that's the problem is you got it to work once. That's your time for the day. So,
yeah.
And the worst problem is I don't have a Samurai VM on my machine right now. Because I left the drive that has my VMs on it at home this morning.
Whoops.
So we're going to capture all that traffic and we're going to examine how the parameters work, right? Okay, so when we did a login, it was sent through a GET, which meant that the username and password were put in the URL string. Okay, that's bad because it gets logged places, right? And that's something we're going to notice, we're going to write up, whatever. Oh, hey, when we authenticate, we get a cookie set. And we can talk about a test just recently that Mike did. Aha, I see Burp. That when Mike logged in, when Mick logged in, we're trying to call him, by the way, he wants to have his name pronounced, so but we're struggling still. The application actually, if you clicked remember me, it actually stored your username and your password in a cookie on your machine, right? It's like, that's horrible.
So people actually still do that. This was recent.
What was it, 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago?
Yeah. You're always thinking, well, those test apps that we do inside of like Samurai, like we'll look at Dojo Basic here, that nobody ever really does things that badly still, do they?
No, they do it worse.
Some of them do.
Yeah. Dojo Basic doesn't store the plain text username and password in a cookie.
Okay, so let's talk about Burp.
Yes.
All right, so one thing I want to do in this session, because this is the first time that we've covered Burp Suite Pro 2.x. So it's 2.1 actually. I know the title was Tactical Burp 2.0, but we're already on 2.1. Portswigger released out of beta version 2.1 at the end of June of this year.
Yeah, and am I correct that 2.0 never came out of beta?
Correct. Yeah. It was like 2.0 beta, and it was in beta for a year.
Yeah, it was in beta for a long time, and which is good, right? That if you were paying for Burp, you had the option of using the 1.7 version previously or switching to the beta, which was kind of nice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So now we're in 2.1 live version, non-beta, and they've made a few changes on this. So I want to walk through, I guess I'll walk through the changes briefly first, you think, and then we'll go through the functionality that's in there, because most of it hasn't changed. But I'll go through the changes because I know some of the people on this call are maybe interested in, what's actually different? What's changed since the last time I used this? So first of all, this dashboard.
That's new.
This is all new. It should be obvious when it pops up. It's like, oh, I haven't seen this before. What's actually happened here is they've taken the scanning, the spidering, and the alert tab. Those three tabs have been consolidated into this tab, this dashboard. Okay. Their functionality has also been expanded a little bit in those, but that's what you're going to see. So previously there would have been a spidering tab, a scanner, spider scanner, and alert tab. Those are all gone. You don't see them listed along the top here. So now we have this. The event log, that's where what used to be the alerts. And this tasks section here, this is where all of the scanning and spidering is. So if I go into new task, let me click on that. Now I have the option of doing a crawl, which would have been the spidering, and an audit, which would have been the scan. Okay. So that's kind of how that's changed. So now there's this whole control for doing it. There's also more functionality in here for controlling the automation around it. So you can do things like the application logins in here. I'll just click on them. So you can actually set up login profiles and then also the resource pool. And I think one of the main reasons that Portswigger went in this direction is they still want to have the manual pen testing tools, but you may have noticed that they've released an enterprise version of Burp as well, which has a lot of this automation in it. So I think a lot of that functionality has kind of been sort of consolidated and brought together under that one umbrella. So.
Yep. And I will say,
is there anything you want me to point out in particular in there?
Well, but one of the things I wanted to say was, what I really liked was the switch from 1.7 to 2.1. Other than the dashboard just being like, bloop, there it is. Almost all, if not all, of the functionality that I use and I'm used to remain the same. So my workflow, the process that I do when I go through a pen test is the same. I've not had to drastically change my work tasks, which I like because I'm old and learning new things is not necessarily, there's a saying for that, right?
Exactly.
So, one of the things to keep in mind as you look at this dashboard, just really quickly, is by default, when you start it up, unless you change things around, it starts up with the two tasks running, or capturing is what they refer to it as, and no filters. So other than debug is not turned on. So if you look, and I'll use the event log as the example, see how 3 of those ovals are orange? That means that those filters are there. And so it's only showing critical error and info event log messages. It doesn't show debug data. Whereas in the issue activity or in the tasks, nothing is orange. Now, to be very clear, and I don't know why, but this is wrong in my head, but it's not. By having nothing selected, everything is shown.
Yeah, it means the filters are basically off. It is kind of counterintuitive that way.
Yeah. So and I'll be blunt. When I first started using 2.0, one of the things that threw me off was the issue had no filters on and nothing listed. Well, of course it has nothing listed. I haven't browsed anything yet. But in my head, it was like, oh man, it's not displaying anything.
I'm going to go ahead and actually hit load the page there. Well, I won't map out the whole thing at this point, but I think we need to have
a little bit of content. Why don't we just do a quick map? The first thing to notice is, see how the proxy tab just lit up orange? Yep. This is a mistake that many people make. And Jason did not make a mistake. He did it on purpose so that we could show this. By default, it's set with proxy on. So if Jason will click there real quick, see how it has actually intercepted and frozen the request. And it's for us to go in and modify it, muck with it a little bit. We don't want to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to click that so it says intercept is off. That will forward that one request, and all the other requests will go through. You'll also notice that other things light up, like the target tab just lit up gray, right, which sounds dumb. It has started to capture requests and responses. And as we've talked about before, but we're gonna outline it again because this is a self-standing class. You'll notice in that target tab, real quick, that some of it is written in black and some of it is written in gray. The black means that Burp saw a request and a response for that URL. The gray means in a response, Burp saw a link to this or a reference to this URL. So it's actually really good. If you know the 4-step methodology, when we get to mapping, we try to use the entire app. If you go look at this target tab and you think you've used the whole app, but things are still gray, that means you have not used the whole app. It's a good double check.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
So do you want to show do you want to map the app real quick so we fill it with data?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. So what Jason's going to do is he's just going to simply go in here, register an account, and we're not going to use the whole app because this is not a full-blown let's spend 2 days hacking websites. This is a 2-hour session on Burp. So he's going to register an account and he's going to use a really super strong password, probably password, or Jason. See, we're super elite hacksaws. We always use weak passwords because nobody would ever think we would. So our accounts are unhackable from that.
Something like that, anyway.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. Once he creates the account, then he's going to log in. Enjoy yourself. he's going to log in, and right now Burp is capturing all of this traffic, right? It's monitoring it, everything else. After he logs in, right, he's going to go, let's just go over to the DNS lookup down on the menu, and we'll do a quick lookup of dvwa.wtf, let's say. And it should probably come back as failed. Yep. And then let's go to the blog entry and enter a blog. That, just so we have, like, and like I said, we're not mapping the whole app. We're just putting a couple things in so we've filled Burp with some stuff. You're thinking about a blog entry on too. You see, I mean, he actually looked up to think about it. Like, oh, this is, oh man, I knew you were going to. Today is Talk Like a Pirate Day, and for some reason, I've decided I hate that idea. I think Denise recommended this morning that we do the entire webcast talking like pirates, and I don't want to do that. So, is there anything we should feed in there? I think we're good for what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah, I think that's enough to get started.
Okay, let's switch back over to Burp real quick. And you want to walk them through the dashboard first? Oh,
yeah.
Just notice, see how the target tab has stuff there. We don't have to go back to it. Just there is things
There's
there.
more stuff is populated there, and we'll get to, well, actually the proxy tab in a moment. But let's look at the dashboard first. So a couple of things I've changed here. First of all, our live audit from the proxy. So this is doing passive checks as I'm clicking on things, entering fields, it's checking to see, am I doing everything correctly? And you can see, if there are any flaws that it can pick up on. And you can see that there are a couple of things that it noticed. It was request number 3 here and number 8 were the two that were marked red. Both are actually the same one. It was a clear text submission of password.
Yep.
The reason it's clear text submission of password is because the site that we're using is HTTP, not HTTPS.
That's okay, right? That extra S is...
It's internal. It's internal. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So, see, not secure on here. So it's HTTP, which makes sense. When you look at, so one of the interesting things on here, this really hasn't changed from before, except it's just been moved to this tab. But let me just make this a little bit larger so we can see it. Inside of Burp, if you want to see the advisory, it explains what it all is here. And then you can look at the request, so we can see what the request that was made in this case here, and we can see the response that came back. And it should highlight, well, in this case here, I don't know if it...
If you go to the password one, it's a good one to show as a highlight.
The password itself, yeah. So this one's, the reason it's saying clear text submission of password is because the login, the form with the login itself was served over HTTP, so it didn't really actually show where it is. It might actually down here.
Yeah,
there it is.
It's going to show.
Okay. Right, so I just used the arrows here at the bottom, so that you can use those to kind of zoom to, whatever, whichever part of the application it is referring to.
Yep. Now, Michael Barba just asked, blue team question, will the WAF see the user agent for Burp or the browser? And the answer is the browser. Burp, I'm not aware of a part of Burp that changes the user. Even the active scanner won't set the user agent to something different.
Not by default. You can set something different.
Yeah, you can. You can absolutely change the user agent to whatever you want, but by default, it's going to just pass on the request it got from the server. As a matter of fact, I'm not aware of any case that by default it even does any of the X forwarded for or X proxied by headers that normal browser proxies, that's the wrong way to say it, but I think you know what I mean. Normal proxies may add. Burp doesn't add any of those. To the end system, Burp doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? Burp has not modified the request in a way that's identifiable, with one exception. There is, if you're going to an HTTPS site, Burp does have a CA certificate that it uses that you have to trust. And there are supposedly ways, I've not looked deep enough into it to find out if it's true, there are JavaScript things that you're supposed to be able to do to identify that the certificate is not the one you expected.
Actually, since we're on that topic, I can go ahead and point that out, right?
Yeah.
So under proxy options, right here is your option to import-export that CA certificate. So you can also generate a new one. But if I want to import this certificate into my browser, that way my browser will trust this proxy. That way I can actually run things over HTTPS without the browser complaining that it's not there's no valid certificate. So.
And you should do that mainly because one thing that many people don't realize when they use an interception proxy like this, what they'll do is they'll go through the proxy and their browser will say, whoa, I don't trust this CA cert. And they'll go in and say, no, it's okay this time. Just accept it. And they feel that that's enough. It's not, because if I go, let's say I go to www.secureideas.com and it loads content from training.secureideas.com to display it, both of those sites use HTTPS. If you accept the risk of going to www.secureideas.com without having a trusted certificate because you're intercepting it, when your browser attempts to load the content from training. It will silently drop it. It will not prompt for things like CSS, images, forms, whatever that are loaded from another site. It just won't load them. And so by trusting the CA cert, right, you're not going to have those things silently drop, so you won't miss anything.
So you'll want to export as a DER format, certificate in DER format, and then give it a file. I just go ahead and do it.
Yeah. The other way to do this, just so you know, is in your browser, browse to burp/cert or http:// burp/cert. And if you do that, by having that burp host name, burp intercepts it, right? And it hands you that DER file by default.
Gave me an option to download that. And then what you would do is you go into your security settings of whichever browser you're using and import it as a trusted CA.
Right. Okay. So jumping back over, another thing I'd like to point out, remember we talked about, if we go back to the dashboard real quick, remember how we talked about that affinity for determining things? Notice that the clear text submission of password is considered a high risk finding, right? It's red. But the unencrypted communications, which we all know is basically the same finding, is marked as a medium as a low, right? And it's marked as a low because they don't know, the automated tool doesn't know if any sensitive data is going across that channel, right? That's one of the problems with playing around with automated tools.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So I
will say the last thing I think we need to run on the dashboard is something I thought was cool because I'm an idiot when I use Burp 1.7. By default in 1.7, it did not look at client-side code during a passive scan. Like it did not do static code analysis of that client-side code, the JavaScript that came down. And so without fail, I would forget to turn that feature on. I'd be 3/4 of the way through mapping and then go, oh, dang it, I need to turn that on. And so I'd have to go and turn it on, and then I would literally have to remap the site. Burp 2.1 has a new feature where you can say new task and then say use a passive crawl and examine, passively scan all traffic, and it will actually look at the traffic and do the analysis it would have done previously. So if you forget to turn it on. Now, keep in mind, by default, it is on. So it's not as big a deal, but it's kind of nice that they added that, oh, dang, I forgot to do this. You can also build your own tasks. So you could have a task there that you run regularly, whatever that happens to be. It just started raining here.
Okay. So I'm going to delete that one that I just created because it's a duplicate.
Yep. Now, let's walk through when we spend most of our time, the target tab is nice, okay? The target tab shows you all the domains, and when you click on a domain, it shows you all of the resources that are under that domain, and that's good and works well. The thing that I use, though, is I spend most of my time when I'm looking at something like that in the Proxy History tab. Right, and the proxy history, I can't say it, but I can. The proxy history tab is literally a list of every request and every response the proxy has seen. That's simple, right? And so you'll notice you'll have that.
Just give me 1 sec. I'm going to change the font on
size.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good idea.
I should have done this before. Maybe 16. Okay, that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that works. Thank you. So what you see is it numbers them from the first request it saw to the last request it saw. And so the first thing we did was we said get the root page. And if Jason clicks up there real quick, you'll see that you've got a request and response. There's the normal request. And here is the response that came back from the server. We have the headers, then a blank line, and then the body of the response. By default, it just shows it in raw format. There's some different displays where you can say, just show me the headers, just show me the body, show me, and by the way, the body they refer to as HTML in this case. They will change how they refer to that based on what body comes back. And then you do have a render tab. I use that periodically, but not very often, because it only renders the HTML.
Nope, not anymore.
Oh, really? So we now have proven that I've not used the render tab since I switched to 2.0.
2.0 has changed it, and it's not really working on mine for some reason. So it doesn't render at all anymore.
Yeah, so it totally broke it. No,
so I actually believe that I think I'm missing a library, because what it actually does now, I think it actually pulls in one of the browser engines.
Okay. So it's rendering it as that's awesome.
It does a full render. It used to only render whatever HTML was there. So if you had like CSS and JavaScript, it wouldn't do anything with that. So often didn't really look right or behave correctly. But now it'll actually render like do a full browser render inside of there. I don't think inside of Samurai. This is something we probably need to look at and see if we can fix inside of Samurai. But I think we're missing one of the libraries that's necessary for that. But if you're running this natively, it actually will load it.
Nice.
Yeah, which is very cool.
Okay.
Right, go on.
No, and you'll see there's all of the different information that we need at a glance to know what's going on. We can see the method that was used. We can see the resource that was loaded. We also can see if any cookies were set. So you'll notice after the login post, right, a cookie was set of a session ID and in the response is where you'll see it. Excuse me. You'll see that there was a session ID set, right, and a UID set.
Yeah, let me just highlight both of those.
So the two different cookies. If we expanded that column out, we'd see them up there, but that's not important. You'll also see if there's the timestamp that Burp thinks it is, what have you, is all there in there. Just like in the previous pane where Jason was showing how he could zip to a different thing, at the bottom, see where it says type a search term? Even though search is disabled in the free version, this search functions. So in this response or this request, so if he'd searched for something like, I don't know, form, right? See how there's the form field that we could do. So one of the things we'll play with, and we'll show you this with Repeater in a bit, right, is that when we send something up, if we want to see if it rendered back in the response, we could actually search for what we sent. I tend to type something like Kevin, right? And then I'll search the response for my name. Because if it has my name in it and I didn't build the page, there's a good chance, right, that it was what I injected, right? And in that page, in that response to the next one, you should see Jason.
Right here.
Yep. And see, you're logged in as Jason, who is an L337 hacker. He doesn't spell leaked. That's L337. It's a weird North Carolina thing.
Exactly. That's what's on my license plate.
Yeah, totally. So that is the proxy history. The target tab can show you much of the same information, right? You'll be able to look at the resources, what have you. So let's use the DNS lookup request and send that to repeater. Does that work? And that should be in your history.
Oh, it's already in the history, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I was thinking that.
Request 8. So if you look, what he'll do is he'll select the request and he'll right click and say send to repeater. Right clicking on things open up a context menu. When you work in that right click, see, the only thing that I know of off the top of my head that's not available in the free version are those engagement tools. One of the things that Jason can do is he can add to scope. Now, because he's selected a single page, it will only add that one page to scope by default. But he can actually change that, and the scope is designed for automation and for saving. Okay? So we can actually say only display in scope items. During mapping, I would not recommend only displaying in scope items. Okay? The reason is what you think is in scope may not be complete or comprehensive. We run into quite often where a customer will say to us, what's in scope is www.secureideas.com, not mentioning the fact that the entire single sign-on system, which is in scope for the test, is actually at login.secureideas.com, right? It's kind of like breaking into a courthouse at a certain county and the state authorized it without telling the local police, right?
So here's a tip. Because this I hate this box.
Yeah.
This was added with 2.0. So basically, when you go to add an item to scope now, it asks this question, and the answer is it's counterintuitive from where I want it to be. I usually want it to be to answer this as no. Because if you answer yes, what it says, it will avoid accumulating project data for out-of-scope items. So anything that you haven't marked in scope will no longer be recorded in your proxy history.
Right.
This is a problem because often there are things that actually are in scope that you haven't discovered yet as in scope. So really this only works, to me, this only works if you are given a very specific scope at the beginning and you're plugging that into your scope tab at the very beginning of your test, and you know you definitely have everything.
Yeah, because even if something's not in scope, if the site is loading from a third-party site, that's relevant to the test. Even if you're not allowed to attack that third-party site, right?
You still might want to notice that, hey, wait a second, we're sending our session token off to this other site. Why are we doing that?
Right.
If you actually select yes on this, you'll never find that out. So
at least you won't find it out through Burp.
Yeah, so I will usually select no on that. And then the other thing is once I've done this, as Kevin said, it's only actually set this particular page to scope, so I need to actually adjust that. So under target scope, we can see that only index.php is in scope. So you want to edit that. I'll go with the basic one first and show that. Okay.
Right.
What I normally do is I use the advanced scope controls. So that's another tip on here. You'll want to check that box. I don't know actually if I go back over here and select it if it'll do it. I think it will. No again. Okay, so with the advanced controls, this is what we used to have prior to 2.0.
Yeah.
Now you get regular expressions you can use to get better definition around it. And why this is important is because in this case here, we're looking at HTTP. We probably want to look at any protocol, right? We probably want to look at any port, so we can actually blank that out. And we probably want to look at any file, so we blank that out too. So now we get something that's more encompassing of the application that we're testing.
Right. And you may also want to do, in our example here, we're good with what we've done. But notice that's just a regular expression. So it's got the caret that says,
you just froze.
Dang it. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah. You start off with caret.
We're using this, but with the caret at the beginning, that means it starts with dojo-basic.wtf. But what about www.dojobasic.wtf, which doesn't work in Samurai, but let's just go with it, right? That you'd want that in scope as well.
Right.
Doing things like that is very important, but you want to be very careful with it, because if you're going to then run the automated tool against that, right, if you don't have the caret there,
so that might make more sense.
www.amazon.com/dojo-basic.wtf would be in scope. Notice that that's a completely different URL, right?
Yeah.
So
now what I just did on there, though, I think that one would work. So this one actually might be better. So this basically says anything that's, well, actually, no, I'm missing one. I need a question on there, don't I? No, this is going to be tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, because if I put a question mark on there, then it'll.
Yeah, and everybody knows regular expressions are perfect. Nobody
absolutely
makes them too greedy. So, but
anyway,
like we said, the scope is really designed for automation, recording, and display. You're able, after you finish mapping the site, one of the things I like to do is go in and mark things in scope that I want to pay attention to, and then tell Burp, only show me in scope items. Okay?
Yeah, so let me just grab something else, and we'll call this out of scope. So we have this cores demo thing, which is actually really cool, but we'll call it out of scope for now. So now that's showed up in our history here. So it's cluttering our view. This thing here that looks like it's just a, filter text on here is a button. So you have to press it.
Yeah, that never looks like a button until you press it and realize it's a button.
And that's where the show only in scope items is.
Yep. And all of a sudden the cores demo stuff goes away because that wasn't in scope. It's not gone. It's just not displayed.
And it will continue to capture. It'll continue to capture as well. So it's not only not gone, but if there's requests going by that don't match the filter, they're still being captured. They're just not being displayed.
Yeah, which is the problem we have with that pop-up, right? Yeah. So let's take that request to the DNS lookup. Notice if we look at the request real quick, you can see this is a post.
I think there it is.
Yeah, see that it's a post. And in the other side, we could also see the response and know how big it is. So the first thing we want to do is just click send. Now we have not changed anything in this request, and what we would look for is to see if it came back the exact same way as the other one. And we can do it that multiple ways. Now we happen to know that it does because, well, we helped write this app. One way to look at it is the length of the response, which is at the bottom of the screen. Another way is to look at the content length. Both of those could be the same if something changed. If you change the word Kevin to Jason, those are different responses, but Kevin and Jason both have 5 letters, so the count would be the same, which is fine. Another way is to use a tool that Jason will talk about because I can't say the word. It's
Compare?
Yes, I always add too many ers.
You're referring to comparer.
Yeah, comparer. And
the diff tool, yeah.
Yeah, what you can do is you can send both of those responses to that tool and compare them to see that they were exactly the same.
Right. So you right click on it and then you can send it to compare that way.
Yeah. But now, So we know, because we've done this before, that this response is the same. Repeater allows us to now, excuse me, change things. Like, for example, notice this is a post. We have a session ID. We have a UID. We also have a target host and a submit button. So what happens if we change the target host to, I don't know, jason.com or jason.wtf, right? And then hit send. And if we look, we can actually search in the response for Jason, and we'll see that we get a response that says, oh, I forgot, yeah, Jason is there. So it says non-authoritative answer, jason.wtf is 192.60. Why did that come back with a response?
Why wouldn't it?
Because the other one did not.
Because WTF is an actual valid.
Oh, so you've turned off host only mode.
Yes.
Okay. I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
So let's use a different one then. SecureIdeas.com.
Yeah, one that we have permission to look at.
Well, it's okay to look at it.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, except in...
I didn't do anything wrong there. We just proxied something that I looked at. I didn't actually modify the traffic to that site.
Yeah, because that was a DNS lookup.
It was just a DNS lookup, yeah, which your computer does all the time. So now we can see we're doing more DNS lookups, this time for SecureIdeas.com. And look at that, we have multiple IP addresses.
Now,
so
from a pen tester perspective, right, two things pop out to mind for me. And I'm assuming they pop to mind for Jason as well. But one, that server 127.0.0.11, address this, non-authoritative answer, that looks like the output from the NSLOOKUP command, right? The other thing Jason and I both notice is that output is wrapped in a pre-tag. The pre-tag is a tag that basically tells the browser, this is pre-formatted text. Don't mangle this. Just display it the way I'm giving it to you, okay? Pre-tags are often wrapped around the output from console tools or back-end console systems. Like, for example, if your web application connects over a TN3270 connection to a mainframe, any output coming from that mainframe would be wrapped in a pre-tag. The reason that's important, remember context, right? What is the context that would give us the output of NSLOOKUP? Well, the context would be we're running NSLOOKUP. If we're running NSLOOKUP, how are we doing that? More than likely, we are using a shell command. We're running the system command inside of PHP or something to run an actual shell command. We also know that shell commands terminate with a semicolon. So what's the format for NSLOOKUP? NSLOOKUP space the name you want to look up. So target host equals SecureIdeas.com. What happens if we put semicolon cat space /etc/PASSWD, right? Looks like a shell command, right? If we then hit send and jump back down to that pre-tag, what we should see is the output from NSLOOKUP and then the output from cat etc password. Cat being, concatenate the file to standard out, and there's the contents of etc password. We, just because we looked at context, just using the repeater tool, have found command execution inside of this application. Now, that's kind of fun, right?
Yep.
That's repeater. Now, it's very, very simple. There's a couple tips and tricks, right? We said one already. When you first come into repeater, hit send without modifying anything. And the reason for that is we want to make sure we get the same response back that we got previously. Things that could cause us to get a different response. Our session is timed out, right? We're mecking around, doing stuff. We go back to a page. that session is gone. I don't know about you, but I do testing over multiple days. And so there's times where I will start a file, save it, come back the next day, load it, and keep going. I get a new session the second day, so any of the request responses from the day before, the session token there is no longer valid. Okay, so that's one. Another thing that could happen is that the application could have an anti-replay on that transaction or on the application as a whole, right? They don't want somebody to be able to just send the same command over and over and over again, or same request over and over again. So we would see those things. And the reason that's important is if you just came in here and if he immediately, like, he got that and he's like, oh, that's command execution, I bet you I can do this, and he just threw semicolon cat etc password and he got an error message back, he won't know whether the error message is because he broke the app the way we want to in a way to get exploitation, or he broke the app because his session timed out or there was anti-replay or something like that, right? He wouldn't know that without having hit send already. Okay. That's one thing.
Sure.
The other tip we'll tell you, when we do a pen test, we end up with lots of repeater tabs. You'll notice that the repeater tab says 1. If Jason clicks up there on that little ... thing, it'll start another one. When you, and I'll tell you that for me, I've ended up with hundreds of repeater tabs, it feels like. Remembering whether you were in 47 or 236 or 53 where you did that one thing is a pain in the butt. And then we found out a couple years ago that Jason has been hiding a feature. And so I'll let him explain it.
Well, just like a lot of applications, if you double click on the tab, you can rename it.
Jason says it like it was so obvious. I want to be clear.
It was obvious to me. I've been doing it for years, and then I did it in front of a class at one point, and I got a, what?
That's exactly, no, I would say I said something different than what. It had a little bit of an obscenity on it.
Okay, yeah, I'm being polite.
Because it was like, how did you do that? And he's like, I double clicked. I just did this. I'm like, when did they add that feature? He's like, Kevin, that's part of Java. Like that. If it's a Java application, you can rename tabs. I'm like, no.
Yeah, it's been pretty standard for Swing applications.
So I went into our private Slack team at Secure Ideas, and I asked the consultants as a whole, and all of them were like, no way, you can do that. So that's why we say Jason was hiding a feature he wasn't telling people.
I wasn't hiding it. But anyway. So that's repeater. We're able to manually repeat, and one of the ways that I use this as well is I use it frequently when I'm getting into testing session management and authentication, because that is one area of a pen test that it's really hard to get automation around that unless you've already have a really good understanding of the mechanism and the way it's supposed to work. This using repeater gives you an opportunity to mess with the request and response in a way. Like, as an example, if we take a look at this one here, so we have this DNS lookup. This is supposed to be something that's only visible after you've logged in, right? If you remember from the application, this menu item showed up after I actually logged in. So I can look at this and I can say, okay, well, there's all of this stuff on here. So let's see if we can find out what type of functionality on here is required for the session. And so what I'll do is I'll do things like, well, why don't I just, let's see if the session ID is actually even used. You know, it's worth checking. So you can just remove stuff. And now it's saying I'm still logged in as Jason, which tells me, okay, well, the session ID is not used.
Or at least not used for the authorization.
Not used for the authorization, but if I scroll down, it also does. Yeah, it doesn't stop me from actually running the DNS lookup, so because it still ran. Some applications you'll notice have lots of cookies. They'll have, I don't know, I've seen applications with 20 cookies or more.
I was testing one this morning that had like 30 or something. It was ridiculous.
Exactly. So that can be an exercise if you're trying to remove each cookie to figure out, well, which ones are actually required to maintain the user session. Because often usually if there's a session ID, that is the one. But sometimes there's some combination of cookies that are required in order to maintain a session. So you want to find out which ones are necessary and then strip out the ones that aren't. That might help you narrow down a way to bypass authentication or authorization. So in this case here, I can also try removing all of the cookies just to see what happens. And it says I'm not logged in. If I keep scrolling down, I actually still ran. So we obviously have an authorization flaw in this application.
Right.
And
we found that with repeater. Now, something to keep in mind because of that, let's say when he removed those cookies, okay, now he's not logged in, but we want to go back to being logged in. He doesn't remember what that cookie was off the top of his head. And a lot of people will go back and resend a new request. You don't have to. See the arrows at the top, that back arrow and the forward arrow? That actually goes back and forth between the requests you've sent in this repeater tab. And so you'll notice as he hits back, things come back, okay? So let's show the decoder against that OA %3D %3D. So you'll notice there's this UID, UID cookie. Now, I don't know about you, but me, I immediately go UID, user ID, but it's got this weird string, okay? Now, what we can do is we can highlight it, right-click and say send to decoder, and decoder encodes and decodes text so that we can play around with it. So the first thing we do is we notice that it ends in %3D %3D. Now we could just say decode as URL encoded or do smart decode, and Burp will notice that encoding. That is a URL encoding, right? It has taken the special characters, the equal signs, and then converted them to their ASCII hex format. Okay, so you got the %3D %3D. Now he hits smart decode and it doesn't know what to do with it, which is sad because the two equal signs at the end, we immediately go, whoa, that's padding for base 64, not 62. So, and if we say decode as base 64, we notice that we get the number 8.
Yay.
Now, I will bet you, and we don't need to do that because of time right now, if Jason goes back in and registers a new account, gets that new UID and sends it over here, it would decode as a 9. So,
yeah, it's the nature of the app.
What happens if we change that to capital M, capital Q, %3D, %3D? Now, this is not a party trick. I have not memorized how to base 64 encode and decode in my head. We just happen to know that that one is the administrator's UID, or the number 1 base 64 encoded. We just found an authorization bypass because we logged in as a user, as a different user. Make sense? And we could have done that inside of Decoder. If Jason, if you just switch back over there real quick.
Huh? Oh, yeah.
Yep. He can go here, and he literally can just change that number to a 1 and then say encode as base 64, and you get the capital M, capital Q equals equals, and then he could also say, you know, URL encode, and oh yeah, I forgot. The URL encode by default encodes all of it. So you want to highlight just the two equal signs. By the way, that format will work in the cookie. You can put that whole thing encoded because it will decode it.
Yeah, what I was going to show is also so what you can actually do it right here as well. There's some encoding and decoding that's available directly in here. There's convert selection. So you can actually do base 64, and if you memorize the keys, it's Control Shift B or Control B.
Yeah, and I don't memorize the keys. I actually always forget you can do it right there.
So I just typed Control B, and that so it's B for base 64, and then I think it's U for There you go.
Yeah. See,
Control B, Control U.
And then when he hits send, it would come back as your log, which he's already done. It'll come back in as login as administrator, right?
You're logged in as admin, yeah.
So let's show, what do you say about Intruder using this exact request?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So We can go to Intruder or Control-I on the request. So we're going to use the same request.
Now, keep in mind that Intruder is the fuzzer. This is what allows us to send in multiple requests in a specific format using specific payloads that we've chosen. So there's 4 tabs by default. The first tab is the target tab, and I want to be very clear. In years and years and years of using Burp, I've never had the target tab fill wrong, but I know that the day I don't look and make sure that it's filled correctly, it will fill incorrectly. So I always look at it. Then you come into the payloads, and you'll notice these squigglies that have highlighted various parameters. Now, for us, we don't want to mess with all of those. So we would go in and just say clear squigglies. See the button off to the right? And then it didn't click. Yeah, he had something selected the first time he clicked it. Notice all of those squigglies went away. Okay. I'm sure those squigglies have a real name. It's just the legal section marker, that you do. It's probably because it's legal stuff. It's probably sectionist markerus. But what we're able to do is now we can take various pieces of data. In this case, we're going to use the UID. We highlight it. Now, you got to be careful. Don't highlight the equal sign, right? And then click Add Squiggly, and you'll notice it puts those squigglies on either side. That's the only parameter we want to mess with right now. If we were doing a brute force attack against the entire request, we may mark other things. If you're using the free version of Burp, Intruder can only intrude or fuzz 1 parameter at a time, and it's throttled to 1 request per second. Okay? The pro version is not. So what we're going to do is we have different attack types. 99.999% of the time, you're going to use sniper because you're going to be attacking 1 parameter at a time. We're going to go to payloads.
Now, before we do that, if you want to learn about the other, bless you, if you want to learn about the other attack types, that's what this button here is for. Okay. Yep. RTFM. Okay. Yeah. My embedded browser is not working.
That's the same thing with the render, I bet.
It was the same thing, yeah. So that's something we need to fix in Samurai. If you're running Burp natively, it will pop up a box that actually shows you what each of the different attack types in this dropdown mean and explains it in quite a bit of detail. So without further ado, we'll go on to the payloads. So this is the payloads we have 1 payload set because we only have 1 payload position set here on the positions tab, right? So there's only going to be 1 payload set.
So now we have the option of picking from a variety of payload types. It defaults to simple list, right? Stuff like that you can pick. Keep in mind that the pro version has a number of lists built into it. The free version does not. But you can use runtime files and use things like secdb or seclists or fuzzdb, which are open source lists. The other thing, in this case, we happen to know that this was an integer, right? So we're going to scroll down to numbers. Now notice that the second part changed because there's different options for numbers. So we're going to start at 0 because we count correctly even though the application doesn't. And we're going to go to 100, let's say. And then we have to set the step, which is count by 1 in this case. Now, if you wanted to count by 5s or 10s or whatever, right? I've worked with some people where they've used Intruder to retrieve sample data from an exploit, and they've stepped by 50 or 100 or 1,000, so they're not grabbing all data. They're just doing something, whatever, right? But we're going to do step by 1. We also want to make sure that it's decimal. Now, at this point, we're counting integers. We, though, remember that parameter was base 64 encoded. So we have to do a payload processing rule toward the bottom, right? And so we're going to say add, select rule type, and we're going to say encode, and then URL, base 64 encode, and then click OK. Now we can add more rules but we don't have to, because if you notice down below, it will automatically encode special characters like the equal sign, okay? Please also keep in mind that those payload processing rules you can turn on and off with the checkbox, and Burp will process them in order. So if you had added a base 64 encode rule and then a suffix or something, that would happen after you base 64 encoded it, okay? That's not good, because in this case, you'd want to suffix it first or something, right? But in this case, we're okay. Now, at this point, we're done. We could run the attack, but there's another thing we want to do. We want to add an option. Now, there's lots of different options. We can add headers. We can
actually,
how many requests and things are going on, right?
That request engine is actually worth mentioning here, because depending on your application, how it's set up and what you're doing with it, the default setting on here for Burp Suite Pro is to run 5 threads. So it's actually going to make 5 simultaneous requests all with the same session. That can potentially be problematic.
Yep.
Right, depending on the environment the application's in. So if you're running in like just a dev environment, maybe it's lower resources, or if the application's not able to stably, I guess, service that many requests at the same time, then you'll want to reduce that down. So it's safe to go ahead and reduce it down to 1 thread. It's just going to run slower.
Yeah. And you may want to increase the threads if you've got an application that can handle it and you're trying to do something very, very quickly. I can't think of any time in the entire time I've been using this I've ever increased the threads. Right. Michael just said that it's called the Silcrow. Am I reading that right?
Section symbol or the Silcrow. Huh.
Nice. That ruins my whole sectionist markerist joke, but cool, we know the name now. But so
Signum sectionist. There.
Nice. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is down to the bottom, we have a grep extract, not which is the next one down. Yep. Because remember that when you log in correctly, it says you are logged in as Jason or admin or Kevin. So what we want to do is we actually want to pull what we're logged in as, who we're logged in as. So we say add, and what it does is it shows us the response the last request got. So if you look, it says you're logged in as admin. So if you literally just highlight admin,
which I will be able to, there we go.
There you go. Notice that it tries to build an expression at the top. Now, you got to be careful, because what it's trying to do is find something unique. If sometimes, like, notice where it says monkey, right? If you were to highlight, let's say okay, for that one. Now let's add another one and highlight the word monkey to show one that breaks, okay? So if you highlight just monkey, oh, it doesn't break anymore. So we made a change. It used to put the name admin as part of the expression, which doesn't work on anything except for the admin. But in this case, it actually got it right. So let's say, okay. So what we're grabbing is both the name and the signature of the user, right? At that point, we're ready to go. We scroll back up all the way to the top, and there is a start attack. In the free version, it's going to pop up and say, whoop, just as a warning, this is throttled. In the pro version, it just runs. And if you notice, we now have a bunch of users. So the first request, request 0, is the baseline request. It's the request. Burp did nothing to change it. It just ran it again. Okay. Then it starts doing. So it did MA0 equals, which is 0, base 64 encoded. It got a blank response back. So 3889 was the response length. And it probably said something like you're not logged in or whatever, right? Then all of the rest from request number 2 to request number 9, yep, if I'm moving across correctly, it shows we grabbed a bunch of users. We got Mick WG, we got Justin, we got John, we've got their signatures, right? Command line Kung Fu, I can't say that. Nice. I'm done. That was awesome. So we've now stolen data out of this application due to this flaw. Make sense? Now, inside of Intruder, we can actually see where it says attack and save. We can actually save out the responses for further processing or, to do things. We can also save the attack configuration, which is nice if you know that your client or the organization you work for, everybody's using Burp. You can hand the attack configuration to another tester or to the developer for them to repeat what you did and understand what's going on. You can also export various things. The one thing that I hate, and I don't think they fixed it in 2.1, see how when we did those two grep extracts, the columns are labeled as in as and lead. They're actually labeled based on what we looked for. Unless something's changed, I don't know of a way to change those. And the reason it's not a big deal for us because we built the attack, but if we take this table or we take a screenshot of this, we hand it to a developer, we hand it to our client, a lot of times they'll ask, what is in as, or what is lead question mark or quotation mark or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Just be prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, what I usually end up doing is I'll save the results table as a CSV and then go in and change it.
Yep.
All right, so
that's Intruder.
That's Intruder.
Now, we've got a little bit more time. Do you want to talk about Extender?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
And it should work because you have an internet connection, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wow. I'm getting some ghosting on here. There we go. Okay, so Extender is the extensions API for Burp Suite. There are many, many extensions out there. We can look at the ones that have been published to the BAP store. So there are more than just what's in the BAP store, but this is where you'll probably find the ones that have been vetted. And you can see that there's a fairly extensive list.
Notice that some are marked Pro. The Extender does work in the free version. The only limitation is the BAP store will not add an extension that tries to add features to the free version that are part of the commercial version. So like if you were to build an active scanner extension, you would not be able to release that for the free version.
So if I look at Paramalyzer.
Oh, why would you pick that one?
So you can see this. I was able to add another tab. You can have fairly complex functionality in here. I actually don't know if Paramalyzer has. Let me look and see.
You did define scope, so.
I did define scope. Oh, here it is right here. So there is the ability to send something to Paramalyzer. So you can inside of an extension. My point is you can even modify this context menu that shows up in places. So it's a fairly rich API for integrating functionality, which is why there are so many extensions. So it is worth looking through if you're trying to find some piece of functionality that's not baked into Burp already.
For me, there's three extensions I use. I use CO2. I use Paramalyzer. Those are two extensions by Jason. And I use them because I think they work well, not because Jason built them. And I also use retire.js, which is, it doesn't add a tab or a context menu. What it does is it extends the passive scanner to recognize retired versions of libraries like jQuery or what have you.
Yeah. As far as I know, they're all free. I don't think I've run across anything that isn't. But some of them are integrations with products. So the product that it integrates with, of course, you might have to purchase.
Yeah. Yep.
So if you are interested in developing extensions at all, you can actually develop them in Java, Ruby, or Python. The recommendation is if you can program in Java to use that, although that's not everybody's favorite programming language, because Burp Suite itself is written in Java, so you get better memory management if you're doing that. Otherwise, you're running basically in a interpreter inside of a JVM. So
does 2.1 still have the same limit that if you're using Python or Ruby, you can only add 2 extensions, whereas with Java extensions, you can add as many as your memory supports?
I think technically you can add more than 2, but you get an diminishing returns from performance. Like it just get more and more of a performance hit the more you're running. So
yeah. With 1.7, it would not let you add more than 2 Python extensions at the same time.
So
cool. You want to show now that so Extender is kind of cool. There is the API documentation stuff there. Paramalyzer is kind of neat, and I want to be clear. I know it's Jason's, but it really is actually kind of neat. And what you do is it works off of what's in scope. Okay, so we added stuff to scope earlier, and then he clicked that analyze button. And at this point, I'm going to stop talking because it makes more sense for Jason to explain his extension.
Yeah, this one doesn't have a great example. Well, maybe it does. I don't know. So I was looking to see what all is in here. So we have basically what it does is it takes all of the parameters and it takes the parameters as Burp has already interpreted them. So Burp already has determined, hey, these are body parameters, URL parameters, cookies. That's what we have on here. If there's JSON parameters that it's identified, they'll show up in here as well. And it attempts to identify what type of data or format that parameter is. So if we can see here that we have a session ID as an example of one that's a little bit different. It's identified this as an MD5 hash. And if you click on one of the values, so you click on that row and then you click on the value, it'll tell you how it came up with why it thinks it's MD5. It says because it's the length, right? It's 128 bits, which is typical of MD5, and it's hex format. The other thing I can do is I can right click on that and do something called, I call it deep analysis on here. In this case, it didn't find any matches. If it had, what it would have done is it would have taken all of these other parameters that it found, so the values of each of these, and done the MD5 on each of those to see if any of them matched, right? Because you can't reverse a hash, but what you can do is compare it to the hash versions of other things, so you can see if something else in the application matched up with it. So that's why that's there.
I don't use a JS beautifier. Do you, Jason?
I do not, no, usually. Did somebody ask about that?
Yeah, Michael Marpite just asked. And he's probably asking it because while we were doing the OWASP presentation he was doing, I made a big deal about JS beautifiers. So
what I usually do for JS actually, and I can show Juice Shop's probably a good example here.
Yeah, Juice Shop's a good example.
Let's see. It sometimes takes a while for it to come up the first time. By the way, if you're new to web application pen testing and want something to practice on, Juice Shop is, I think it's probably the best application out there for that now.
It is awesome.
It is pretty good. It has a built-in CTF with hints and everything else. So what I usually use for JS Beautifier is I'll go into the browser tools. I know this isn't Burp, but I think it's relevant. And if we can find from the sources on here, I may have actually loaded it before, so it might not show up. But you can take a JS file in here and see the pretty print curly brackets on there. You press that and it gives you a pretty printed version of the JavaScript syntax highlighting and all that's in there too. So I found this to be far better than any extension that I found inside of Burp for doing JS pretty print.
Yeah, works awesomely.
See.
And if you have JavaScript that doesn't run right, it won't do it right because it's the way the browser works.
Yeah.
So, awesome. So what, do we want to open it up to questions at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just to be thorough here, sequencer, that's for doing live capture or for analyzing tokens to see how random they are.
Yep.
That hasn't changed. That was there before. Decoder we covered. Compare is a diff tool. We talked about it. It's just a diff tool.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the rest is there's project options and user options. If you do have platform authentication, that's where you're going to find that, is under project and user options.
Yeah, and then there is an upstream proxy if you're testing, but to get to that site, you have to go through a proxy. One of the things we use is we have a server that runs Squid that we VPN into, and it allows us, like, I do quite a bit of testing, like on the road. I can't control my source IP address then, so I VPN in to our network and then use the upstream as the Squid server that we're running. Does two things. One, it hides from the hotel network I'm on or the cell network I'm on who I'm testing, and it also keeps the source IP address from our network so that our client, who may have whitelisted us in their WAF or whitelisted us on their firewall, allows us to get to it.
Yep. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Any questions for this? We hope this was useful. We've tried to run through the various features and stuff like that. We do have another session that we're going to schedule, and I'm going to surprise Jason with this. We have a session we call the real world web pen testing, where we actually, instead of focusing on the tool, we focus on the testing steps and everything else like that we're going to schedule to run. If you go out to professionalevil.com, there is a link to our Slack channel. Our connection is not private because you're going through Burp.
Yeah. I'm going to just try to bypass it and see if it lets me.
Yeah, it should. I don't think we load anything separate from there. See the join the Professional Evil Slack channel. That's out there. Glad you guys enjoyed it. We are recording this. We will be putting the recording up in training.securideals.com. And what we'll do is everybody who paid to attend today or got the veteran discount, we're going to enroll you in the course. So you will get access. If you already have an account at training.securideals.com, it will just enroll that account. It'll have to be under the same email address. If you don't have an account, it will create one for you, and then all you have to do is click reset my password, get the link to reset your password, and you'll be able to log in. We'll do that probably tonight, might be tomorrow. It all depends on how much work Jason or I have to catch up. Can you use Burp for what? I'm sorry. Oh, can you use so you are allowed to capture traffic in Burp. The minute you start trying to fuzz things or repeat things, now you've crossed the line into hacking, and no, we are not giving permission for that.
I did bring this up though, so I know Kevin just mentioned. I just want to share. Everybody got it. Join the Slack channel, please. That's if you have any questions later on. That's how you're going to get in touch with us. That's the easiest way. So just throw your questions in there and join the conversation. It doesn't cost anything, so do that.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you at an event we're at.
All right.